Hello, I'm Allison Kushner, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of the Disability Equity Office Director and as ADA Coordinator at the University of Michigan. We have a lot to cover in today's session, Disability 101, Faculty and Instructor Edition. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's workshop will provide an overview of disability considerations in higher education, highlighting how to create accessible and inclusive environments and the significance of effective academic accommodations for learning outcomes. We'll also discuss campus resources, communication strategies, disability etiquette, and proactive course design tips to support all students. I'll also sprinkle some reminders in about how to take these principles and apply them into the workplace environment outside of the classroom. First, let's discuss some disability basics and background information, as well as considerations specific to the higher education environment. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Amendments Act is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination and harassment against an individual with a disability, or IWD, in employment, public places, public education, and also protects people from discrimination based on their association with an IWD, such as a family member. It also creates an affirmative duty to provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with a disability, and we'll discuss a bit more on that shortly. Under the ADA, a disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. To determine what substantially means in this context, the implementing regulations actually provide us with great examples of exactly what this covers, including activities like thinking, concentrating, speaking, seeing, hearing, sleeping, as well as bodily system functions of the immune, respiratory, endocrine, reproductive, and neurological systems. The ADA also makes clear that the substantial limitation doesn't have to be substantially limiting at all times or always be active. Instead, the condition can be in remission, like cancer, or it can be a medical condition that lends itself to periods of exacerbation, like major depressive disorder or anxiety disorders. However, the list of limitations is not exhaustive, and it's important to remember that any medical condition, depending on the impact of the limitation, can be a disability under the ADA. When we talk about disability, it's important to recognize that some are apparent, sometimes called visible or obvious, like when someone uses a wheelchair. Others are non-apparent, sometimes called invisible, such as chronic pain, diabetes, or a mental health condition. What's also key to remember is that a person's experience can change over time. A disability may move between being apparent and non-apparent depending on circumstances. And in fact, most disabilities are non-apparent, which means you often can't tell just by observing someone. This is why fostering inclusive environments is so important, because we never truly know who may be impacted. The list of conditions isn't exhaustive, but it highlights some common diagnoses typically considered non-apparent. If these conditions substantially limit daily activities, they can qualify as disabilities. What's also important to understand is that many of these conditions can shift between being apparent and non-apparent. For example, someone with epilepsy may appear to have no disability most of the time, but during a seizure, their disability becomes apparent. As instructors, faculty, and even coworkers, we need to remember that most disabilities are non-apparent. That means it's very likely you won't know which students in your classroom have a disability. This is why it's critical to create that inclusive environment for learning by default, so students have equitable access whether their disability is apparent to us or not. There are more than 1 billion individuals with disabilities worldwide, and in the United States, 1 in 4 adults lives with a disability. Disability is also the largest minority group in the US, and it's one of the only groups that anyone can join at any point in their lifetime. Yet people with disabilities experience unemployment rates 4 times higher than those without disabilities. That means disability is something everyone should consider in their daily lives. So I'd like you to pause for just a moment and consider. If 1 in 4 people lives with a disability, what does that mean for educators, presenters, colleagues, about how we design our classrooms, workspaces, materials, and interactions with students and coworkers? Keep in mind that 21% of undergraduates and 11% of post-baccalaureate students report having a disability. Yet only around 12 to 13% of them disclose that disability to their school or seek accommodations. That means most students with disabilities are navigating college without accommodations. It's an important reminder for faculty instructors to not assume you know who in our classrooms has a disability. Before we get to how to design teaching and environments to support all students, let's take a minute to discuss the why students choose to not disclose. Students may have a variety of reasons why they decide not to disclose a disability. Stigma and discrimination can play a big role. Negative stereotypes, fears of being judged, or even doubts about whether their needs are legitimate. Some students want to maintain what feels like a normal identity and avoid labels altogether. Disclosure itself can be difficult. Processes can feel confusing, and students may struggle to articulate their needs. On top of that, past reactions from friends or faculty can influence whether they share at all. And in some cases, students may not currently need accommodations. It's important to understand these barriers to work towards fostering trust, normalizing the use of support, and creating classrooms where disclosure feels safe for students. So, what impact does this non-disclosure have on students? For some, it may not have any impact. However, more than half of students with disabilities don't request accommodations, which in fact may have a large ripple effect on outcomes. Only about a third of students with disabilities graduate from a 4-year university within 8 years. And while 39% of non-disabled adults hold a bachelor's degree or higher, that number drops to just 21% for disabled adults. The impact is significant. Many take on additional college debt, and people with disabilities remain the most under and unemployed minority group in the country. These numbers highlight why accessibility and support in higher education are so critical to adults with disabilities outcomes. When we look at the breakdown of disability types among students, we do see a wide range of experiences. According to the American College Health Association survey of over 25,000 undergraduate students published in 2024, ADHD types 1 through 3 represents about 15 to 18% of students with disabilities in college. Students with learning disabilities account for 2.5 to 6%, while 3 to 5% report being autistic. The remaining categories of blind or low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, and those with mobility disabilities and speech or language disorder disabilities account for about 10 to 12% of students reporting having disabilities. These numbers remind us that disability in higher education is diverse. There's no single story or single need, which is why flexibility and inclusivity in teaching are important. Now, while these numbers show just how many students are living with disabilities, it's important to recognize that the barriers they face often go beyond the disability itself. Much of the challenge comes from ableism, biases, stereotypes, and systems that make it harder for students with disabilities to fully participate and succeed. Ableism is a discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities, often rooted in the assumption that typical abilities are the norm and are therefore superior. It can show up in obvious ways, like denying accommodations, but also in subtle, everyday interactions, comments, assumptions, or classroom practices that send the message that students with disabilities don't belong or need to fix themselves. Understanding ableism is key because it reminds us that disability isn't just about a medical condition. It's also about the social and structural barriers that either create inclusion or exclusion. Take a moment to think about some of the microaggressions you may have witnessed or experienced yourself. Keeping in mind that when we talk about microaggressions, we're referring to the subtle, often unintentional actions or comments that communicate bias. For individuals with disabilities, this can mean denying their identity, their lived experiences, or even their right to privacy. It can look like treating someone as helpless, talking down to them in a patronizing way, or infantilizing them as if they can't make their own decisions. These actions to some may seem small in the moment, but they send powerful messages that a person is less capable or less valued. Being aware of these behaviors helps us create classrooms where students can feel respected and seen for who they are. Microaggressions can show up in the way we question or doubt a student's need for accommodations. Comments like, "You seem fine. Do you really need that cane or service animal?" Or, "You were walking around yesterday." These dismiss a person's lived reality. It also happens when we interrupt or finish sentences for someone who stutters, or when we use a condescending tone, speaking louder than necessary as if it makes our messages more clear. Even classroom practices like requiring everyone to participate in exactly the same way can exclude students whose disabilities might make that difficult. The key takeaway is this: our words and practices matter. Small changes in how we respond and structure our classrooms, workspaces, and environments can make the difference between exclusion and belonging. Sometimes we'll hear concerns like, "Why do I need to make this accessible? It just creates extra work for me." But accessibility isn't extra, it's essential. A course isn't truly complete until it's accessible. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's also required by law and university policy. Another misconception is that accommodations may give students an unfair advantage. For example, extra time on a test. In reality, accommodations level the playing field, ensuring everyone starts from the same point. Think about captions. Yes, they support deaf and hard of hearing students, but they also help non-native English speakers, students watching in noisy environments, or anyone who learns better visually. Accessibility benefits everyone, not just those who request it. Sometimes ableist actions occur unintentionally due to oversight or because things are done a certain way simply because they've always been done that way. For instance, selecting classrooms or formats that lack accessibility can immediately exclude students. Moving a class at the last minute, whether online or in person, might seem minor, but it can disrupt transportation or accommodations already arranged, creating additional barriers or exacerbating limitations related to concentration, time management, planning, physical fatigue, and chronic pain. Showing videos without captions makes content inaccessible, and visiting places without transportation or parking options adds obstacles. Even seemingly small acts like standing in front of a power-assisted door operator or choosing not to use a microphone when it's available in a lecture hall can hinder participation. These examples serve as a reminder that accessibility often depends on proactive planning and mindfulness in the moment. As we just saw, small choices like classroom setup or not using a microphone can create barriers. The same is true for how we structure participation. Relying on a single method of engagement, such as raise your hands or respond verbally, or requiring people to work with inaccessible PDFs, can exclude students and create barriers. Therefore, it's important to consider diverse ways of structuring learning experiences and participation. The same goes for not providing short breaks during longer classes or making assumptions about a disabled student's ability. Flexibility is essential. Providing multiple means for engagement options creates access for everyone. The impact of inclusive teaching and instruction on students with disabilities cannot be overstated. Many of the ideas discussed today require little to no effort and have a considerable impact on improving students' outcomes directly and indirectly. We're going to take a few minutes to discuss some of the common themes in creating accessible classrooms and courses to put inclusive learning principles into practice. Let's start with the framework that makes up Universal Design for Instruction, or UDI. UDI challenges the instructor to proactively make all aspects of instruction, including climate, interaction, physical environments, products, delivery methods, information resources and technology, feedback, and assessment usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. UDL guidelines focus on the foundation of universal design concepts in physical space, promote the development of curriculum that includes multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of engagement. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, are incorporated into UDI to ensure that IT or technology used for instructional practices is accessible and usable for all students with disabilities. They're supported by a foundation of 4 principles that results in IT that is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Universal design in the physical space is built on a set of guiding principles that makes learning environments accessible to everyone. The first is equitable use, meaning decisions should be useful and marketable to people of all abilities. Connected to that is flexibility in use, which allows for a wide range of preferences and abilities so students have choices in how they engage. Design should also be simple and intuitive, easy to understand no matter somebody's background, language, or level of experience. Perceptible information ensures that important details are communicated clearly, regardless of sensory ability or surrounding conditions. We also look at tolerance for error, which minimizes risks or negative consequences if mistakes happen, and low physical effort, so participation is efficient and comfortable without unnecessary fatigue. Finally, size and space for approach and use reminds us that environments and tools need to fit everyone, regardless of body size, posture, or mobility. Together, these principles help us design classrooms, materials, and experiences that work for all students. Let's consider how some universal design and physical design and learning principles show up in inclusive teaching practices. Equitable use can include making sure your classrooms, labs, fieldwork sites, and even office hours are accessible to everyone. That includes simple mobility considerations, like having enough space between tables, ensuring working elevators, accessible restrooms, and clear wayfinding signs. Importantly, accessible seating should never be segregated. It should be integrated into the classroom. Examples of low physical use include power-assisted door operators or PADOs, which make entry easy for everyone. Finally, size and space for approach and use include tools and environments that fit all users, like labs including accessible beakers, vents, or stools, so every student can fully participate in the learning environment. Perceptible information in a classroom setting can mean making sure students can clearly access what's being taught. That means arranging seating with good sight lines, using the microphone, and offering information in multiple formats. Flexibility could be as simple as offering virtual and in-person office hours, building in time for movement or breaks in longer classes, or encouraging self-care, like standing or stretching, or even pacing in the back of the room. Simple fidget tools can also make a big difference in supporting attention and comfort. Simple and intuitive design can include offering different seating options, with or without armrests, so students can choose what works best for them. Keep in mind, not all instructors and faculty have the ability to make these changes, but being able to choose and utilize ones available to you can improve an environment in major ways. Size and space for everyone to approach and use means making sure desks and tables fit that wide variety of need, providing tall, adjustable sit-to-stand desks that allow everyone to participate comfortably. Finally, tolerance for error is really about inviting feedback from students and encouraging them to come to you as the instructor at any time to identify any accessibility issues, particularly early on, and invite them to suggest alternatives. This way, what might be a potential small barrier can be addressed quickly before these issues become larger barriers later on. Universal design for instruction integrates all of these concepts into a single system. It uses the principles of universal design for learning, and WCAG to create learning environments that work for everyone. These principles apply to our physical spaces, our pedagogy, and the technology we use. The ultimate goal is simple but powerful. Every universal design practice we put into place should make instruction more accessible, more usable, and more inclusive for all students. To design a course guided by UDI, start by describing the learning objectives, the content, and the teaching philosophy that'll guide you, whether that's active learning, constructivism, or other evidence-based practices. From there, consider the diverse characteristics of students, like their age, their background, learning preferences, and their varying abilities to see, hear, move, or communicate. If these things aren't known to you at the time of course creation, consider your past experiences and a wide variety of lived experiences of students at your school or in your program. By integrating UDI strategies with evidence-based practices, you can create methods, materials, and assessments that maximize learning for all students, keeping in mind the need to plan for accommodations and clearly communicating how students can request them. Finally, we evaluate. We observe, collect feedback, and make adjustments. UDI is an ongoing process of reflection and refinement to improve access for every learner. When applying UDI, it helps to think through a simple checklist. Start with the class climate. Is it welcoming? Consider interaction. Are there multiple ways to interact? Next, consider physical environment and products. Are they accessible to everyone? Think about your delivery methods and whether they reach diverse learners, and make sure your information, resources, and technology are accessible. Finally, review that feedback and assessments to see if they measure learning fairly, and always plan for accommodations when additional support is needed. On the next few slides, we're going to dive a bit deeper into each of these items to provide some actionable ways to incorporate these practices into your classroom or even in your workplace environment. To foster a welcoming environment, greet students by name when possible and encourage sharing multiple perspectives. Support each individual's need based on their actual requests and not assumptions. Be approachable, invite questions, and offer flexible ways to provide those questions. Provide flexible meeting times. Use teaching materials that reflect and respect our students' diverse backgrounds and interests. Always respect privacy. Never single out or share personal information about students, including about accommodations that may be in place. To make classes inclusive, connect with students in different ways, face-to-face, online, even by phone, and be sure it's accessible to everyone. In person, face the class, speak clearly, and use the microphone again if needed. Online, add captions and make materials easy to read. Consider background noise and even visual distractions. Use interactive activities and group work with different roles so everybody can join in. Ensure that physical spaces, materials, and activities are accessible and inclusive. Whenever possible, select classrooms and labs that provide access. Arrange seating for unobstructed sight lines and participation, as well as movement. Ensure space for wheelchairs, interpreters, or captionists. Make equipment user-friendly for individuals with various physical abilities by adding features like large print labels and simple instructions. There are excellent options available in labs, such as measuring cups with high contrast markings, braille labelers, talking devices, textured pipettes, non-slip mats, magnifiers, and transparent shatterproof beakers with handles and lids. Most importantly, prioritize safety for everyone by creating clear emergency procedures that accommodate the needs of students with disabilities. Equally important is using multiple instructional methods. Make content relevant by connecting lessons to diverse perspectives and real-world contexts when possible. Use flexible curriculum and provide supports like outlines, summaries, and guiding questions. Deliver material in multiple ways: lectures, discussions, hands-on activities, and digital tools. Give clear instructions in different formats. Use visual and tactile aids, and always describe visual content so it's accessible to everyone. Focus on accessible course materials. Be sure you're selecting textbooks and resources early so students can get a head start or arrange for alternate formats. Provide materials in accessible digital formats using clear headings, descriptive text for images, uncluttered layouts, high contrast, and captioned media. Present content simply and clearly. Define new terms and point students to campus resources. And when labs or computers are involved, make sure assistive technology is available and that you understand what is available for your students. Set clear expectations with consistent standards, transparent rubrics, and clear deadlines. Test in the same way you teach, and reduce unnecessary time limits when speed isn't the goal. Provide regular feedback throughout the semester and opportunities for improvement. Don't wait to input all grades at the end of the semester, and give students multiple ways to demonstrate their learning through tests, projects, presentations, or group work, as we mentioned earlier. Support success by sharing examples of good work, study guides, and practice questions. Next, consider accommodations. Remember, even with excellent course design, students may need an additional support. Know your campus protocols for arranging alternate formats, captioning, and other accommodations. Share this information in your syllabus and make sure teaching or lab assistants are aware of student needs as well, and ensure they have received student accommodation letters if you have through your university's Services for Students with Disabilities office. Let's take a quick minute to dive deeper and discuss student and instructor requirements for requesting and receiving accommodations. Undergraduate and graduate students who require academic accommodations at the University of Michigan should always go through the Services for Students with Disabilities office. If their accommodations aren't working, the student needs to contact SSD right away. Just as a note, there are some nuances when it comes to graduate students, for example, those in medical school, but SSD is always an okay jumping off point for academic accommodation requests. You can also reach out to our office to discuss navigating any referral questions that you might have. Faculty and instructors must ensure they're consistently providing the accommodations SSD has approved. If you have questions about how to implement them or believe they may fundamentally alter the nature of your course, reach out to SSD for guidance or to our office as well. If a student asks you directly for accommodations or shares with you that a disability or medical condition is in some way affecting their academic performance or ability to attend class or ability to participate, you are required to refer them to SSD. When a student discloses a disability or medical condition that affects their coursework, there's a few key steps to follow. First, faculty again are obligated to refer the student to Services for Students with Disabilities. It's important to thank the student for sharing this information and follow up in writing so there's a record of the interaction. Do not take medical documentation. Instead, hand it back, thank them again for their openness, and redirect to SSD. What we need to avoid is granting what's sometimes called informal accommodations. While well-intentioned, these can create inconsistency and inequity. Instead, rely on SSD's established process. Faculty should also look at the SSD Accommodations Implementation Guide and Guidelines for Ensuring Equitable Academic Success, which is available in the PowerPoint, to make sure every student receives fair and consistent support. Remember, all of the UDI techniques today are separate and apart from accommodations. It is always okay to create access for everyone using the principles we discussed earlier. Let's consider a few takeaways from today's presentation. It's important to remember that accessibility is not a one-time ask. It's an ongoing and intentional process. It starts with planning ahead and considering both the physical and virtual spaces where learning happens. Adding clear syllabus statements, encouraging and acknowledging students, and making referrals when needed all help to create a supportive climate. We can reduce barriers by designing accessible materials from the beginning, building in flexibility, and setting clear expectations. UDI creates spaces and environments built on the premise that everyone learns differently. It also makes space for everyone to reflect on their past courses and working practices, which gives us insight to design even more accessible learning experiences in the future. Thank you for watching. We hope you find this information useful. For questions or for more information, please email disabilityequity@umich.edu.